Man walked 7 miles to work daily until woman checked security cameras. He'd been leaving for work every morning before the sun rose and returning home later after it had set. The muscles in his limbs were hot with pain, the soles of his feet swollen and thrumming. But he knew he couldn't stop. Not now, where everything hung in the balance. But he should have known that someone had him in their sights. Maybe changing routes would have been the way to go before it was too late. But for Arthur Jackson, things weren't supposed to go this way. Everything had finally been looking up for him, from his work to his relationship with his daughter Millie. But lately, everything just seemed to go south for him. In a small town in Pennsylvania, the sun would rise as he set out on his daily commute to work. He would have done anything to provide for his daughter. Arthur's life was simple. Every day he'd make the commute to work a journey that would take him 10 miles to and from the construction site across town. After 2 years of sobriety, his life had taken a turn for the better. He had a steady job at the construction site, which he took on with determination to provide for Millie, the light of his life. Arthur had no idea that one day, all this would come to a stop. But this wasn't the first time Arthur was clinging on to dear life. The last battle he'd had was over Millie's custody, where he'd had to face off against his ex-wife for the right to care for their daughter. The second time had been with his old landlady, who'd evicted him from his apartment after he'd had trouble paying the previous month's rent. Arthur thought he'd beat this issue the way he'd won those other ones. He had no idea what and who he was going up against. Arthur and Millie moved into Arthur's late brother's house a year before this problem reared its face. Millie had settled into her new environment, making new friends and carving her own path in school. Arthur, too, found his way in this new life. He perfectly played the role of dad and always strived to provide for his lovely daughter. But one day, all this would come to an end. Arthur had long felt a deep sense of responsibility to honor his brother's memory by taking care of Millie in the modest home they lived in. It was the least he could do. However, life had thrown another challenge at Arthur when his old bicycle, the one that had been ferrying him to work for months, broke down beyond repair one fateful evening. This would be the start of his nightmares. Arthur's bicycle breaking down had a domino effect that spiraled his life into chaos. The little savings he had managed to accumulate were reserved for Millie's needs, leaving no room for a bike replacement. Determined not to let his daughter down, Arthur made a tough decision. He would walk to work every day. On paper, this was a good plan. Arthur could also handle the execution, but he didn't factor in the fact that someone would see him. The construction site was 5 miles away, which meant Arthur had to trek 10 miles each day enduring the changing weather, the scorching heat, or the biting cold. But he accepted this sacrifice willingly. For Millie, he would do anything. So each morning, Arthur set out on his journey before dawn, walking briskly through the town's quiet streets. As the days passed, Arthur's routine became ingrained in the fabric of his life. His early mornings were filled with solitude, his footsteps echoing in the empty streets as he made his way to the construction site. The work was challenging, but Arthur was determined to prove his worth. The sun would be high in the sky by the time he arrived, and the day's labor would begin. Despite the physical toll, Arthur's resolve remained unshaken. He often found solace in the thought of Millie waiting at home, which always fueled his determination. But as the weeks went by, he began to notice the toll his long hours away were taking on his relationship with Millie. Trouble was finally here, its ugly head looming over Arthur's life. It started with the time Arthur usually left the house, coupled with the time he returned home. Before losing his bicycle, Arthur usually left the house after Millie boarded the school bus. But after the crisis, he usually left so early that she'd still be asleep. Although she was in her early teens and still needed help preparing for school, she knew his sacrifice and took it upon herself not to make any demands. But her life was about to take a turn real soon. Arthur would leave before sunrise and return late at night, given how far he had to walk. He would return home exhausted from the day's work, only to find Millie already asleep. His heart ached at the missed moments, the cooking sessions and bedtime stories, the shared laughter, the simple joy of spending time together. But he needed to press on, convincing himself he was doing it all for Millie's future. Little did he know that beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. Someone keeping a keen eye on him began to notice the strain in his eyes, the weariness etched into his very step. They had mapped his route to work and had observed the sacrifices he made, the long hours he put in, and the toll it took on his relationship with Millie. The stress of exhaustion from his demanding job and the growing distance between him and Millie weighed heavily on Arthur's shoulders. He contemplated leaving his job even just for a day to spend more time with his daughter. But he knew he couldn't afford such a luxury, not with bills to pay and Millie's future to secure. The thought of the bar down the street became a tempting refuge for him, a place to drown his sorrows away in the familiar burn of alcohol. But the memories of his past struggles with addiction taunted him, reminding him of the fragility of his sobriety. Yet he held back, clinging to the promise he made to Millie and himself. But a keen eye had been studying him somewhere along the path he usually walked. It would only be a matter of time before she decided to take matters into her own hands. On a chilly morning, with the first rays of the sun casting a golden hue over the quiet neighborhood, Amanda Price first noticed Arthur. From the window of her warm, cozy home, she saw a figure moving with purpose along the sidewalk. Intrigued, she focused on the man, clad in dark, worn-out clothes, his hood pulled low over his head. Amanda's initial reaction was suspicion. The neighborhood had been a haven for her family, and the sight of a stranger with a secretive air triggered her protective instincts. She contemplated calling the neighborhood watch for a moment, suspecting him to be a potential threat. Yet something in his demeanor, the way he seemed lost in his own thoughts, stayed her hand. As the days passed, Amanda couldn't shake the image of the mysterious man from her mind. She noticed his consistent routine, the early morning and late evening walks, the wariness in his steps. It became evident that he wasn't a threat, but rather a person burdened by life's hardships. Her curiosity grew, and she found herself yearning to understand the story behind those tired eyes. One morning, Amanda decided to step out of her comfort zone. She waited for Arthur by the curb, determined to strike up a conversation. He seemed reluctant when she finally approached him, as if he didn't belong in their polished neighborhood. Despite his unease, he spoke with a surprising gentleness, revealing a kindness that contradicted his rough appearance. His greeting was short but warm and respectful. She could feel the rough calluses painting his palm like scars from an old war when she shook her hand. He held her gaze as he spoke, apologizing for having walked through her neighborhood. He then told her he needed somewhere to be. Amanda had never met such a baffling man before. Her curiosity grew after this first encounter. The man didn't even introduce himself, but what was odd was that he didn't show up for another week. It seemed like he'd decided to change routes. But a week later, he walked by. Amanda, who had been standing vigil every morning and night trying to understand what she'd gotten herself into, was beside herself when she saw him. She rushed out, surprising herself by how much she cared. "You're back," she said while panting, hands on her knees as she caught her breath. "I am," the man smiled. "I didn't want to be a nuisance, so I found another road, but it was less than ideal. It almost got me fired from work." Although the man didn't know it then, this would be the start of a life-changing experience for him and his daughter. The man opened up about his job, telling Amanda he was a construction worker on the other side of town. He told her about his job and how much he loved it, as it was a second chance at life for him. Amanda listened carefully, finally getting some answers to questions that had been keeping her awake all week. She knew she'd have to step in sooner or later. Amanda made it a habit to chat with Arthur every morning. Slowly, the layers of reserve peeled away and Arthur's guarded demeanor softened. Amanda, a work-from-home mom with a seemingly perfect life, found herself drawn to the man's struggles. She noticed her interactions with her 10-year-old daughter, Kendi, a hint of paternal warmth that hinted at an even deeper story. Amanda had already decided to involve her husband in this unexpected connection. She introduced Arthur to her lawyer husband, Henry, who, despite initial reservations, sensed the genuine character beneath Arthur's worn exterior. The couple learned of Arthur's journey through sobriety, the custody battles, and the recent breakdown of his bicycle, which had forced him into his grueling routine. As Amanda delved deeper into Arthur's life, she uncovered a number of challenges and setbacks. From custody battles to eviction, Arthur had faced hardships that would break most people. Amanda marveled at his resilience and felt a growing urge to help him to mend the fractures in his life. Determined to make a difference, Amanda and her husband decided to gift Arthur something that would make his journey easier. Arthur's gift was a new electric bicycle, an investment in his well-being and a gesture of support. The $3,000 bike, carefully chosen for its durability and comfort, represented a lifeline for the single dad, a way to alleviate the physical strain of his daily commute. When Amanda presented the bike to Arthur, he was initially taken aback by the generosity. Gratitude washed over his face as he realized that someone cared enough to ease his burden. The new mode of transportation not only shortened his commute, but also provided a symbolic bridge between his world and Amanda's. The connection between their families deepened, and Arthur, once a solitary figure walking in the shadows, was welcomed into a community he never thought would embrace him. Even his daughter was welcomed with open arms. As Arthur pedaled to work on his new bike, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The physical strain lessened, and he found himself with more time for Millie. The evenings that were once consumed by exhaustion now became precious moments for father-daughter bonding. Amanda's intervention had not only changed his life, but also the trajectory of Millie's adolescence. Amanda, too, experienced a transformation. What began as a curious observation turned into a profound connection that enriched both families. The seemingly perfect life in her good neighborhood had been missing the depth and unpredictability that Arthur brought into her world. The friendship that blossomed between their families taught Amanda that true fulfillment often comes from the unexpected connections forged in the midst of life's challenges. In the end, Amanda and Arthur's lives melded in a way that defied social norms and expectations. The woman from the comfortable neighborhood and the man who had weathered life's storms together discovered that true wealth does not lie in material comforts. It does in the shared human experience, the joy of overcoming struggles, the warmth of unexpected friendships, and the resilience of the human spirit.